Welcome to the Student Success Podcast. I'm Al Solano, founder of the Continuous Learning Institute, or CLI, a higher education online resource focused on providing community college and open access university educators with practical information on how to get results at their campus. As a resource within CLI, the Student Success Podcast is focused on just that, the challenges, opportunities, failures, and successes of practices intended to improve student success and equity. The goal is to leave you with thought-provoking ideas, nuts and bolts information, and or lessons learned from the field so you can consider how you might apply them to your institutional context. For today's podcast, it's an honor to have Eloy Oakley, Chancellor for the California Community College System. Welcome to the Student Success Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Al. I've been looking forward to this.
We met, I believe it was November 2019. There was a conference in Riverside, and I went up to you. I introduced myself, and I think you saw my name tag, and you looked at me and you said, "I get your emails."
That's right.
That actually surprised me that you actually opened them as well. And since then, I've personally been trying to do a better job with social media. And about a couple of years ago, I finally started to get into Twitter, and I've been following you. And when you tweet, I just go, yes. And I get to learn more about your story. I didn't know so many things about you. We'd just like to unpack today, especially your experience as a returning student. But before we get into that, what I like to ask all guests, if you wouldn't mind sharing a hobby, perhaps a superpower or a special talent, something beyond your work.
Sure. Whether fortunately or unfortunately, my work tends to be 24/7, and that is intentionally. It's a passion. The work that we're doing in the community colleges or the UC or throughout the country, it's a passion. But when I'm not focused on that passion, I'm focused on the passion of baseball, which is baseball season again. So the Dodgers are back. I grew up in LA, so I bleed Dodger blue, as well as the Lakers. So those are the two things that I pay attention to when I'm not paying attention to higher ed, hoping that we can get both teams back into the championship season again.
Did you play ball?
I played a lot of sports. That's, growing up in Southeast LA, that was the one thing that provided an escape. So played basketball, baseball, spent most of my time playing football. It's a whole nother story, but that's actually what got me offers to go on to a four-year university, which I ultimately turned down and chose to join the Army. But football is probably the sport that I spend most of my time in.
So you watch baseball, and I'll have to admit this. I don't watch a lot of sports because I just can't take the anxiety.
Oh, yeah. No, I have a lot of anxiety, particularly once it comes playoff time.
The UCLA, I'm a Bruin. I did my graduate work there, in the recent UCLA game, just the anxiety that built. As I mentioned earlier, I got to know more about you through social media. And one of the things I learned is that you, as you stated, were enlisted in the Army. Mm-hmm. And I was enlisted as well. And what a lot of people don't know is that there's a big difference between the enlisted class and the officer class.
That's for sure.
And when I'm often asked, well, I did straight out of high school, I spent a wonderful summer with the sand fleas and mosquitoes in Parris Island, South Carolina. They say, well, what's the difference? And I said, well, enlisted people tend to come from the poorest communities of the country. Mm-hmm. And they are really the backbone of the military. They are the working class of the military. They're the ones who actually get things done. When we have veterans coming into the community college system, what a lot of people don't know is that it comes from that enlisted ranks, people who don't have a degree like the officers have. And so they're looking for their next career. And so would just love to know, just dig into your experience when you left the military and you were looking into college. Can you take us through your experience from that moment of outreach to registration to classes, and who and what helped you be successful?
Sure. As you described, being in the military, and I was most of my time was spent in the 82nd Airborne Division, and the enlisted. We do most of the heavy lifting. The one thing that struck me clear was that I was helping a lot of our lieutenants. I was the company commander's radio guys. I was humping that radio with him, calling out the playbook as we did our exercises to the lieutenants. But the one thing that clearly separated me from them, even though I was telling the lieutenants what to do, was a piece of paper, that degree. That left an impression on me when I left the military after 4 years. That was an important differentiator between where I was and where those officers were. And I always noticed that they ate better than me, they slept better than me, and they got to do a lot of things that I wasn't doing. So that always stuck in the back of my head. So, after I got out of the military, I'd already started a family, was working. For me, I can't speak to everybody's experience, but for me, those 4 years in the military were a good thing for me. It took several years before I decided to go back to school, working hard for people that were running a business. And I realized again that what was the difference? I was working for them. And the reason I was working for them is because I lacked that formal education. I decided one day, and I was driving by Golden West College. I was living in Long Beach at the time, just decided to stop, picked up a class schedule, and decided to enroll. And that was really it. I was fortunate that when I got onto campus, I met some people that really set me on the right path. I always say this, but if it wasn't for a community college, I wouldn't be here today. And there's no doubt about that. Because we're open to the top 100% of students that come through our doors, they were open for me. I didn't have to worry about whether or not I was going to get accepted. I didn't have to worry about whether or not I hadn't been to school, excuse me, in 6 or 7 years. But they opened the door. I got in front of people who appreciated me for who I was and gave me a roadmap, and that's all I needed. So it's that experience that informs me every day I come to work, because, I was lucky, and our system relies too much on the luck of students like me. So it's that experience that has shaped me. Very fortunate that I've had that experience, but the struggles that I went through just to get through college and to get transferred to UC Irvine are what really keeps me coming to work.
I remember when I left the military. I'm originally from New York City, but I stayed in California.
Smart.
Yes. Yeah, I arrived here. It was February. It was about 78 degrees and no humidity in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
Are you kidding me? I got to stay. But when I remember, I've always been a planner, and I learned more of that even in the military. And when I was looking for a community college, I wanted to know, well, what does it take? What do I need to do? A little recon, if you will. They said, well, you have to take these tests. And I said, oh, tests? Like for what? And they say, well, to get into math and English, you have to take these tests. And I said, well, I haven't done math in forever. Not a lot of students have this, but I had a little bit of money and I got myself a tutor to help me refresh some things. And to be quite honest, I didn't learn a whole lot. They taught me a lot of tricks, test taking. And I did take the placement. Fortunately, I got into transfer level English and math, but there was a few faculty members that actually put me under their wing. They said, hey, we like how you're doing. I'll never forget this, Eloy. I was getting some food in the cafeteria, and as I was walking up, a faculty member was walking with me, and he said, hey, Al, you're doing really well in the classes. Do you think you might apply to any of the UCs or Berkeley or UCLA? And I looked at him like he was crazy, because that wasn't my experience growing up. That was for other people.
Right.
I call them the Biffs and Buffies. I had that image in my mind of them wearing, a cardigan with. It's just that wasn't me. But this the first time actually sad, and I didn't get this in K-12 where someone believed in me was in the community college. So I don't know, did you have, Eloy, any experiences like that with faculty or countless others that you wouldn't mind sharing?
Sure. I tell the story a lot, but when I was in high school, I'd get into my share of trouble. My high school counselor, I think it was junior year, I had my meeting with her. She just took me aside and said, Eloy, you really don't need to worry about the UC. Let's focus on maybe other opportunities, maybe some career training or the community colleges, because, it's just going to be too much to think about the UC for you. And so that stuck with me. And as you said, growing up in working class communities, that's always something for somebody else. I grew up in the shadow of UCLA and USC, and all I knew about them was their football schedule. I never thought about going to either one of those schools. That, thought, well, maybe I can play enough football to get into a school, but at 6'1", 187 in high school, I wasn't big enough to go to any of those schools. So that was my experience as well. And when I went to community college, I wasn't even thinking about the UC. I was fortunate that I came across a counselor. Susan Winters was her name. Unfortunately, she passed away, but she took some time with me and said, I think that there's a path for you to UC Irvine. They have a guaranteed admissions program right now. It's called ZOT, Zero In on Transfer. If you're open to a couple of majors, we can get you in, and you fill out this contract, you take these courses, and you get a minimum GPA. And if you do that, you're in. That's all I needed to know. Once I knew that, I knew I could do it because, as you said, those of us who come from the military, the one thing we're good at is when you hand us the plan, we'll execute the plan. So I executed that plan and I got into UC Irvine. But what makes the story even funnier is my time at Golden West was great. But like everybody, we run into professors from time to time. There was a time where I wanted to be a chemist. So I was taking all of the chemistry, all the math, got into organic chemistry. And I knew the professor because I hung out a lot in the chemistry lab. His name was Stan Winters, Dr. Stan Winters, and unfortunately he passed as well. By the way, I really like Stan, but when it came time to enrolling in organic chemistry, he pulled me aside one day when he saw me in the lab. He said, "Hey, Eloy, I see you enrolled in my class for fall." I said, "Yep, I sure did, Stan. I want to be in the best organic chemistry class." He said, "Well, I need you to think about pulling out. I need you to think about taking Professor So-and-so's class." I said, "Well, why?" He said, "My class is hard. You're a little older, you've got a family, you're not going to have time to study. I don't want to set you up for failure. And so I think you need to take the night class with Professor So-and-so." That really set me back. I thought about it the whole night. Then I woke up kind of pissed off. And I saw him the next day. I said, "No, Dr. Winters, I'm going to take your class, but I appreciate you thinking about me." And of course, I passed that class. But the funny story is Stan Winters' wife was the counselor, Susan Ryder. It's an interesting juxtaposition of how one side of that marriage helped me get to UC Irvine. The other side of that marriage tried to keep me from doing what I felt I needed to do. So, but if it wasn't for that counselor, I would never have thought about going to UC Irvine. And of course, I wouldn't be here. The last part of the story I'll tell you is, like you, I had to take a placement exam. I didn't know any better, so I just didn't prepare for it. I didn't know that the test was going to be given. I showed up, I took the test, and as you can imagine, I didn't do that great. It had been 7 years since I'd taken math, and I got into 2 levels below transfer level algebra. So that's the other piece that stuck with me is, once I had some hindsight, I thought, why? That cost me almost a year and a half in the community college. And, I was an older adult. I was working, raising a family. There were so many times where I thought, I can't keep doing this. I'm just going to find a job and keep working. That experience really tainted my thinking. And to this day, I'm a firm believer that those placement exams do much more harm than good. And I'm glad that we finally got to the point in California where we're putting those exams in the rearview mirror.
What a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. I was going to ask you if the winners, if they were related. So it's so funny that they are. Husband and wife team. You always got to listen to the wife for sure.
That's for sure.
Thank you for sharing that. When I was in high school, I was working, 40 hours a week. And I remember when it came time to the SAT, actually it was called the PSAT first. It's kind of your trial run. And then you take and I looked at those tests. I don't know what these questions are asking. What is this? And plus you're asking me to answer these in about a minute and a half each. I don't get it. My whole K-12 experience did not prepare me for these tests. That's a very interesting experience because when I went in the military and then I went to community college, back to the faculty, his history faculty, he's no longer with us, Ron Yoshino at Riverside. He encouraged me. He knew I was from New York. He says, Al, you should also check out the schools there like Cornell. I said, oh man, Ron, you're talking UC in Berkeley. Now you're talking about, you're nuts. You should do it. You should. So the interesting thing is that along the way in my community college experience, he said, Al, why don't you become part of this club? I said, all right, Ron, why don't you take a leadership role? I said, all right. He said, hey, you do some volunteer hours. Why don't you go to student services and fill out that form where they can capture all your volunteer hours? And what he was doing, he was building my transfer application.
Right. Exactly.
And he wrote this amazing recommendation. And I get into Cornell, but here's the thing about Cornell, as one of the 8 Ivy League, it tends to be more progressive in how it opens its doors more widely to compared to the other ones. And as a transfer student, they gave you an option of whether you want to submit SAT scores or not. And I thought that was fantastic because if those scores were really predictive of how I was going to perform, it just didn't pan out that way. I had, I think, a 3.783 at community college, and then I graduated from Cornell with 3.73. That SAT would have said otherwise.
Right.
And so I'm glad we're talking about this. And again, this comes from following you on Twitter. When I saw your tweets about the SAT, I'm like, yes, man, absolutely. I'm there with you. But community colleges for years, even though they don't have the SAT or ACT, they had their own version of it, which were these placement tests. And as a student, I don't know if you remember, Eloy, I remember vividly one of my peers in particular, she, a single mom, 2 kids, and she said, I can't, I have to drop out. And I said, why? You're doing great. She tested in the very low, right? So she's basically completing the high school English and math curriculum. And then she dropped out, and I always remember her. And there are countless students that this happened to. So that said, I'd love for you to, especially because there are people who listen to this podcast outside of California, if you can unpack what AB 705 is and what it has accomplished.
Sure. First of all, I mean, the standardized testing has a long history in the United States, and a lot of it is not very good. It has a lot of eugenic roots, a lot of racist roots in how it started and how it was used by different colleges and universities. So, the whole basis here, particularly in the community colleges, has been, how do you companies like the College Board or ACT take what they develop for the 4 universities and sell it to the community colleges. And they did a great job. They sold to community colleges that you can test your students in math and English, and this will give you a better idea of where they should start. And of course, we as educators trusted that. We dove into it, and nearly every community college in the nation was using either AccuPlacer or Compass, the 2 primary placement exams that were created by College Board and ACT. And so this was big business, very big business. If you consider that, there are somewhere around 1,400 community colleges in the nation, all using this test thousands of times a semester. That's a lot of money. So when I was at Long Beach City College, I had the pleasure of being president of Long Beach City College. I had an amazing team of researchers led by Dr. John Hetz, who's now with me at the Chancellor's office. At the time, there was research being done at the Community College Research Center at Columbia University that was uncovering the fact that these tests had very little predictive value. So we started questioning the tests at Long Beach, and Dr. John Hetz was showing me data that clearly showed the impact to our student body. And, Long Beach, we were then and are, Long Beach is now, is a majority minority serving institution, but it was an institution that had seen a lot of demographic change. It was primarily a white community, then over a decade or two, become very much a minority city and community, and Long Beach City College was the same. So John showed me clearly how the placement exams were having a disproportionate impact on our students of color, Black students, Latino students, and they have a big Asian Pacific Islander community in Long Beach, a big Cambodian community. So these tests were devastating these communities, by placing them in remedial courses 2-3 levels below college level math and English. So these students would never get out. Yes, there would be those handful of success stories, the student that came in 3 levels below and transferred to Harvard. That's one in several hundred thousand episodes. Predominantly what was happening was these students would not finish. They would drop out. They would burn up their financial aid. They would get so frustrated that they would stop. They had to go to work. They had to care for their children, their families. So based on that research, we developed a multiple measures placement system at Long Beach back around 2012. There were several other colleges doing something similar. Cuyamaca College was doing something similar. We just kept pushing. And we found that within 1 or 2 semesters, the number of students of color being placed in transfer level courses was growing by 300, 400, 500% sometimes. An amazing difference. And then these students were succeeding at the same rates. So you started to see this community of practice growing. More and more colleges were looking at the RP group, got involved. Several research organizations got involved. So when I had the privilege of becoming the chancellor of the system, I teamed up with my colleagues at the Campaign for College Opportunity. We all felt that this was, in order for us to achieve the vision for success goals, in order for us to really have equity in the system, we needed to dismantle standardized testing. And we needed to think about a different way of doing this. And so, fortunately, a lot of forces came together. We had an author of the bill, Jackie Irwin, who believed in this as well, and a governor who believed in this as well. So we were able, through AB 705, to dismantle standardized testing in California for our community colleges and create a new system of placing students based on actual predictive values like high school transcripts, like things that really can predict how they're going to do. And that's really changed the way we think about remedial education, because by doing that, we've essentially seen many of the remedial education courses that were developed to trap students go away. And we've seen tremendous increases, particularly for students of color, completing transfer level math and English. We think that this has been a huge step toward equity in our system. I've had the pleasure of talking about AB 705 with our friends at CUNY, with friends throughout the nation. We're part of the Strong Start to Finish coalition in the nation, and AB 705 is really at the cornerstone of what they're trying to do to spread the word across the country. So we've really seen a huge increase. And then, of course, along the way, there's also the SAT and the ACT. And because I have the pleasure of also serving on the UC Board of Regents, this question has come up there as well. And we've just seen the same kind of attitude that it's time to question what standardized testing has done to our institution and question the solutions that we've been sold for so many decades, and come to believe, and this is the problem, Al, we've come to believe that these are real standards of talent and ability, when in fact they have nothing to do with telling us whether a student is talented or able. All it tells us is whether or not they've had either the family resources to get ready for that test, or they were fortunate enough to be enrolled in a school that really helps prepare students for that test, or they were lucky. I'm just really glad to see us begin to turn the corner in standardized testing, and I probably won't be happy until I see the dismantling of the College Board, because I just don't believe that they have seen or really have internalized how much damage they have done to students of color.
As you probably are aware, I coach many campuses, and the coaching that I do, I learned a lot from my experience in K-12, which is to get really down deep into colleges' settings and take them through a process. And I'm there with them side by side. I'm not telling them what to do. I'm just the Peter Drucker quote about how culture eats strategy for lunch. I say it eats it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And what I try to do is ensure that culture doesn't eat up very important priorities such as AB 705 or guided pathways. So in my work, one of the beauties of AB 705 that I have seen is this light bulb, these aha moments that faculty members have had of how it's challenged them to elevate their pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
That, yes, some of these students are going to be a little bit what they would deem underprepared, but by elevating our instruction, by giving them that support, by believing in them, we're seeing that not only are we having more students of color coming into transfer level English and math, but they're succeeding. And there's still some work to be done in terms of equity gaps, and that's okay. We're working on it. And by the way, I make the argument that closing equity gaps is not enough. Right. Because if you have completion rates, let's say of the highest are 30%, and everybody reaches 30%, that's very unacceptable. Right. That to me, I think, is a really good product. We often hear, educators hate mandates. They don't like to be told what, but this is a particular one that I feel, as again, I go back to my experience as a student. Without AB 705, this just wouldn't have happened. It would have been pockets of there, like at Long Beach, Cuyamaca, but it just wouldn't have been system-wide because people wanted to protect really the status quo. I want to go to baseball for a moment to use it as a metaphor. Guided pathways, essential to that was actually AB 705, getting rid of all this DevEd wilderness. But there's a lot more to it. Mm-hmm. And as let's say you're the manager and you're looking out in the field and you're seeing all the colleges, these are the players. And California is one of only 2 states that provided substantive funding for guided pathways. Washington's the other one. As in California, you go into the 5th year of funding. As you look at the players out there, as you see the game going, what do you think is going well? And what are, as a manager or coach, what are some of your concerns as we go into this 5th year?
The way I think about guided pathways is this, when I became chancellor, there were several colleges that were already sort of starting to use the guided pathway model as we know it today. But the guided pathway model has been around for a long time, whether it was if you were an Achieving the Dream institution, you were following sort of a similar model, or if you were following the Gates completion by design methodology, you were following a similar model. But they all sort of have this one fundamental point, which is intentionality. Intentionality in the way we design our processes for students, in the way that we schedule, and then in the way that we intentionally design around the student and their needs, not the institutional needs. So guided pathways seemed like the best likely choice to implement in such a disparate system like the California community colleges, where we were all over the map. Many people still think we're all over the map, but I thought it was really important that we adopt a common language about the way that we're approaching the problem, a way that we're approaching the data, a way that we're approaching the key progress indicators. Fortunately, there was a book that everybody could have that my good friend Davis Jenkins and his colleagues put together. So it was a roadmap that we could use and use it as an umbrella to then begin to do a lot of the reforms that needed to take place to implement things like AB 705. It started with a handful of forward-leaning institutions. We were able to get them some funding, get them going. So they sort of led the charge. And then we came in with the state funding that opened the door to all the colleges. So I think we've come a long way. I think as the manager, I see the team coming together very well. We're now talking in the same language. We know the playbook. Not every player is completely adept at implementing the playbook, but we're all working off the same playbook. We've been able to link all the policy that we've created around the Guided Pathways framework so that people can see how it all fits together. Before Guided Pathways, we always had these different reforms or different funding mechanisms that would come into play, and nobody could really understand how they fit together. For me, that was important because if we're going to move the system along, we all have to understand how all these things fit together, and we need to have a basis for why we're doing what we're doing. And so those 4 pillars in the Guided Pathways framework really help anchor everything that we're doing. So from that perspective, it's like, and I don't mean to sound like we didn't have a great system to begin with. We did. We have amazing educators, amazing leaders. But as a team, we weren't working well together. I think we have a great system now in place that allows us to move forward, that allows us to introduce new things that are linked to it so that people can see why it's there. But we still have a lot of work to do in terms of implementing all 4 pillars at every college in the system. And then finally, one point that you made, this is more about changing culture than it is about changing practice, because it is the culture that needs to change, the way we think about the problem that needs to change, the way our language, the language that we use needs to change. The way we think about students, do we think about them from a deficit point of view? Do we think about them from an asset point of view? All those things matter because there's so many intangible things that happen on a college campus that impact student behavior so much that it is that culture that really sets the tone. How do we treat a student from the day he or she walks onto campus? Sometimes that has more to do with whether or not they succeed than the actual instruction in the classroom. Not to take anything away from the faculty in the classroom, but it's really about how the student feels. Do they see themselves in the faculty and staff on campus? Do they feel valued? All those things matter. So I think Guided Pathways in that way has been a big success in that we are beginning to really change the way we think about the problem. And then from there, I'm confident that the answers will come. Our colleges are no other system of higher education is more dedicated to the student than community colleges are. So I think once we have the right framework, the right incentives, the right culture in place, those answers will come, because I can honestly say that 99.9% of the faculty and staff on our campuses come to work for the right reason, and that's to serve students. That's all they do.
As we wrap up, I wanted to hone in on students. I'm aware that at many campuses in the UCs that there are what they call these NASPA fellows. These are, gosh, we put everything into acronyms. I don't even remember what it is, but it's people who want to go into higher ed, especially in student affairs. And there are students at some of the UCs. I know that they're part of they have work groups as part of, I think it's under Associated Student Government, and they're working to make a more seamless transition, for example, for community college students to enter UC. They're providing policy recommendations to leadership. These are our future leaders. These are students who recognize early on a path, which is they want to go into higher ed. They want to make a difference. What do you say to these aspiring leaders, this generation? Which, by the way, I must say, they're often characterized with this broad strokes of, this is the lazy generation, and this is the. I think there's always been those people, and they tend to be, from my experience, in the very higher level incomes class, whereas the more poor middle class don't have the luxury to be lazy and entitled. And so these people who, marched, their feet were on the ground for Black Lives Matter. They're activists. They want a better world. So what do you say to these aspiring students who want to be higher education leaders? Any advice you have for them?
Well, first of all, let me say that our students are some of the most resilient individuals in society. They're an amazing group. I couldn't be more prouder of this generation of students. They have shown us adults what real commitment and sacrifice is all about. And they have shown us that we've gotten a little too comfortable, those of us in leadership, in our lifestyle, that a lot of us aren't willing to risk it. But they risked everything over the last year, and all these protests and all the work that they've done, the voting, the turnout. They're an amazing group. I am very hopeful that they will consider leadership in higher education because, one, we need their experience, their resiliency in our system, their understanding of what students need. We need to diversify our faculty and our staff and our leadership in the community colleges, not because just for the sake of diversity, but for the sake of getting people in the classroom on our campuses that really understand the life experiences of our students. And so that our students see their lived experiences in the people that they run into on our college campuses. All students succeed with a diverse faculty and staff, not just students of color, all students. So I would encourage them to see higher ed as a place to exhibit leadership. They understand that life is difficult. This last year has been hugely difficult for them. And we need that kind of resiliency in our system because changing higher ed, leading in higher ed is difficult. It's extremely difficult, particularly for those that want to see change, that want to see things improve. Our systems seem to be built to resist change. We need change makers. We need individuals who really understand and are committed to change. And this group of students would be perfect in our system. So I'm hopeful that we can do everything we can, not only to encourage them, to actually incentivize them to continue their education and to see particularly community colleges as a place for them to go and grow and lead.
Thank you for those words of wisdom. Do you have any last words that you would like to impart?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Al, for one, having me, but two, for the work that you're doing. And, the reason that that you stood out to me when I met you was because we need people who are willing to insert themselves, who are willing to take on leadership. You don't need a fancy title. You don't need to be president of a college campus to be a change maker, to be a leader. I want to just say thanks for the work that you're doing. You're engaging, you're trying to see change happen, and you're talking about our students. To the listeners, I just say, if you care about higher education, if you care about education, then get involved. Whatever you're doing today, it doesn't matter whether you're the groundskeeper, you're the college president, or everyone in between, or you're just somebody that lives near a college campus, you're somebody who's a parent, who's got kids in higher education. Get involved. Go to your local board meeting of the Community College Board of Trustees. Let them know what you think. Write to the college president, write to the legislature, support public higher education, and push for us to continue to open the doors to more students. because, if anything, what we've learned from the last year, from the last 4 years, is that education matters. And the world is changing faster than we can control it. It's going to continue to change. And those who are going to benefit from the change, those who are going to be resilient in the change, are those who have had access to good quality higher education. So we need to keep higher education alive and more accessible, democratize it. And that can't happen unless we have people from the outside pushing on us, coming to board meetings, making their thoughts known, and showing leadership in their own way. So that's my final thought is, we need everybody. We need everybody involved in order to see the change that we want to see, and so that the future of our children and grandchildren will be even better than the opportunities we had, because I think that's what we all want for our kids, is that they have a better opportunity than the ones we were afforded.
Beautiful. Thank you for participating in the Student Success Podcast, Eloy.
It's been great. It's been fun. Again, thank you for your work, Al.
Thank you for listening to the Student Success Podcast. Each episode has show notes, which include helpful links and necessary follow-up information to help you get results. Please consider subscribing to the Continuous Learning Institute website. There are no advertisements. It's simply updates about articles, tools, resources, podcasts, etc., all tailored for you, the practitioner. Thank you.